The Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education will now proceed. Today, our focus is on stem cells. Our hearing coincides with the announcement by the South Korean Nuclear Transplantation Consortium that they are starting an operation today on a World Stem Cell Foundation, which will be based in the Seoul National University in South Korea with satellite offices in San Francisco and England. I applaud what they are doing, but I regret that the United States is falling farther behind in world leadership on scientific research generally and specifically on stem cell research. This is the 16th hearing which this subcommittee has held on this important subject since we first learned about stem cells in November of 1998. And it is well known that the stem cells have the possibility for curing or alleviating the problems of so many maladies. The House of Representatives has passed a legislation which would remove the restriction by the federal government on funding stem cell research, and Senator Harkin and I have introduced identical legislation in the Senate, Senate Bill 471. The House bill received support from some 50 Republicans crossing party lines, and it is my view that with sufficient focus and sufficient attention, there could be amassed enough votes to override a presidential veto. I say that regretfully and reluctantly, but this is a matter of utmost importance to the health direct impact of some 110 million Americans. President Nixon declared war on cancer in 1970, and had the United States devoted the resources to that war which we devote to other wars, I think the war on cancer could have been won. And I say that with special concern because I've had my own problems with Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer this year, and cancer continues to claim deaths in the hundreds of thousands. This happens to be an especially busy day. Most days are busy on Capitol Hill, but we're in the midst of proceedings on the nomination of Ms. Meyer for the Supreme Court, and I'm going to have to excuse myself at about 10:10. But I will have an opportunity before that occurs to hear all of the witnesses, and now I'd like to yield to my distinguished ranking member, Senator Harkin. Senator Cochran, would you care to make an opening statement?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I congratulate you on your continued strong leadership in helping to explore the possibilities that medical research holds for curing and preventing illness and disease. You have done more than anybody I can remember since I've been in the Senate to not only focus attention on these opportunities that we have to legislate and support research and to authorize programs to achieve these goals. So I congratulate you and thank you again for this hearing. I'm really here to introduce Anthony Herrera, who's a friend of mine since 1961, who's a member of this panel, and so I will await your advices as to when that would be appropriate.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Cochran. We appreciate your continuing support for this subcommittee and your membership on the subcommittee, notwithstanding your very onerous duties as chairman of the Full Appropriations Committee. And we now move to our panel of witnesses, and our lead witness is Mr. Anthony Herrera. And I yield to you again, Mr. Chairman, for the formal introduction.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce to the committee Anthony Herrera, who I've known since 1961. We met when I was entering my first year of law school, and he was beginning his first year of undergraduate school at the University of Mississippi, and I happened to be in the same residence hall, became the dormitory manager, as we called it back in those days. But he was young but energetic, full of an interest in all of the things that were going on that campus, became an excellent student, and then went on to a successful career in the performing arts as an actor, writer, director. He's been on As the World Turns, off and on for a long, long time. James Stenbeck is his stage name on that show. And James Stenbeck has been a survivor, too, of sorts. He would disappear. People would think he was a goner, and then he would reappear sometime later, full of life and enthusiasm. And that's the story of Anthony Herrera as well. He's battled cancer and has survived. He's written a book about it, The Cancer War, which I recommend, and I know the chairman has read it. I've read it. And it's very instructive into the challenges that confront someone who's a victim of lymphoma or other forms of cancer. He had a rare kind of lymphoma. And transplants of bone marrow, stem cell, all of these things have been involved in his life. He's lived through it all and can help us understand the challenges that victims face and the possible successes there are in our effort to deal more successfully with some of these forms of cancer. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome him and thank him for being here to help us understand the challenges.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Herrera, we do very much appreciate your being here today, especially since you came from Buenos Aires to participate in this hearing. And I compliment you on the book which you have written, and I paid particular note that your references to stem cells as they relate to your situation. We now begin the customary 5-minute rounds for the witnesses, and we start with Mr. Anthony Herrera.
Thank you. In January of 1997, at New York Hospital, I was diagnosed with mantle cell lymphoma and was told, "This disease will kill you. There's nothing we can do. You're going to die." Then, without anesthesia, this oncologist drilled through my skin, through my periosteum, and into the bone and extracted marrow. The pain was incredible. That night, I debated whether to put my .38 Smith & Wesson to my temple and pull the trigger or saddle up. I pondered each option. Then I pictured myself on a horse riding into a dark canyon. I found a poem by Tennessee Williams from Night of the Iguana. I read it every day. I then went to Sloan Kettering, where I was told we're going to work hard and hope for the best. They had a new protocol for mantle cell developed with a hospital in Paris. I was the fifth patient in the United States to undergo this regimen. Massive amounts of chemotherapy and total body irradiation to kill lymphoma cells and take my immune system to zero. On August 1st, 1997, I received an autologous stem cell transplant. Autologous meaning the stem cells were taken from my body. My mouth was full of sores, my skin was gray, I had no hair, no fingernails, no toenails, but I was found to be in remission. I lived under the belief that if the disease came back, that I would die. In November of 1998, I relapsed, but during these 18 months, a new approach to the stem cell transplant for mantle cell had been developed at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas, where I was admitted March 30th, 1999. In April, I underwent an allogeneic stem cell transplant using a non-myeloablative regimen. Allogeneic meaning the cells came from a donor. Non-myeloablative meaning they did not burn my immune system to zero with chemo, hence less toxicity. 6 weeks later, the lymphoma was still active. We tried a donor lymphocyte infusion, adding more of my brother's cells. I then suffered from CMV. I bled internally and lost 30 pounds in 3 weeks, followed by a mild stroke and a seizure, but I was in remission. 1 year later, August 15th, 2000, a CAT scan showed that I had relapsed. The disease was back. I was told without treatment you will die in less than 12 months and that another donor lymphocyte infusion could kill you. was a small amount of disease, so I had time to think. 6 weeks later, I saddled up and requested a CAT scan. At this juncture, medical history was made. This scan showed less disease than 6 weeks before, which meant that my new immune system had started fighting the lymphoma without chemotherapy, without drugs, without radiation. My new immune system was taking out the cancer. My new immune system in my bone marrow, created by donor stem cells. Throughout this journey, I listened to Willie Nelson, Louis Armstrong, and Agustin Lara of Mexico. I recited Tennessee Williams every day. I quoted from John Ford's The Searchers. When asked if he wanted to quit, John Wayne retorted, "That'll be the day." I found dedicated and inspired doctors and nurses such as Sergio Giralt and Joyce Newman, doctors and nurses with guts and vision. In 1950, William Faulkner won the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature. He concluded his acceptance speech with the following: "I believe that man will not merely endure, he will prevail. He is immortal not because he alone among creatures has an inexhaustible voice, but because he has a soul, a spirit capable of compassion and sacrifice. The writer's duty is to write about these things. It is his privilege to help man endure by lifting his heart, by reminding him of the courage and honor and hope and pride and compassion and pity and sacrifice which have been the glory of his past. The poet's voice need not merely be the record of man, it can be one of the props, the pillars to help him endure and prevail. I hope that you senators and this Congress find that it is your privilege and your duty to fight with your intelligence and pride and compassion to continue to build the pillars of man, the arts for the spirit, education for the mind, and medical research for the body. Ladies and gentlemen, let me leave you with this thought. The stem cell is the future of medicine, and I am alive because of the progress in stem cell research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herrera, for that very poignant and emphatic testimony, and for the authentication as to what stem cells can do for what they have done for you. Thank you very much, Dr. Wagner. Mr. Herrera, you have testified about your situation being a medical breakthrough in medical history. Was the aspect of using stem cells on your lymphoma the unique breakthrough that you referred to?
Without question. The difference between the first transplant and the second transplant was that the first transplant, they took stem cells out of my body. They did that by I injected myself with a drug called Neupogen every day. This causes the bone marrow to overproduce. Little baby stem cells are floating around in the blood. They stick a pipe in here, run it through a machine, and they take out the little baby stem cells. The problem with that transplant for mantle cell lymphoma, which they were not aware of at the time, was this is my immune system. So the theory of the allogeneic stem cell transplant is, I go back to my Mississippi roots, we're having civil disorder in Wiggins, Mississippi, so we call out the Stone County National Guard. I'm told not to let anybody cross this line. Winfield Alexander wants to cross the line. I can't stick Winfield in the gut with a bayonet because he was my Boy Scout leader in the Rattlesnake Patrol. But if you bring in the National Guard from Montana, they speak the same language, they can read the signs, and they're not going to have a problem sticking Winfield with a bayonet. So the foreign immune system is going to be tougher on the lymphoma, on the blood cancer, because it doesn't know it that well. That's kind of a basic understanding or comment, but that's how I had to understand it.
Thank you, Mr. Herrera.
Anthony, I'm so pleased that you were able to be here today to put in perspective from a patient's point of view how important research and the development of new treatments, finding new ways of dealing with these medical problems will be, and the role that we can play. I know if you had a vote, you'd probably vote to quadruple, double, exponentially increase funding, but where in the area of research, from your experience do we need to supplement and try to provide more incentives through federal research appropriations to achieve the goals of curing cancers like yours?
What these ladies and gentlemen up here have said is there should be massive amounts of billions of dollars and no restrictions on any kind of this research, because I've met with the doctor at MD Anderson, Andreev, I believe is his name, and we were talking about the embryonic versus the adult. He said we need lots of room to experiment. The drug that helped save my life, which has probably saved hundreds of thousands of lives, Neupogen, was developed by Janice Gaberlove and 2 other doctors, and she was in charge of my first bone marrow transplant. I said, how did you develop this drug? She said, we didn't have a straight line. We were in there, in that region, working, and all of a sudden there was a path we could follow. So there needs to be no restriction. There needs to be massive amounts of money. South Korea, Singapore, 2 years ago were ahead of us. China just put billions of dollars into research. So there should be no restrictions and massive amounts of money put behind this, in my opinion.
From your experience, could you tell us in your own words what the difference is from a patient's point of view in a bone marrow transplant therapy and a stem cell transplant therapy?
Actually, someone please correct me if I'm wrong, they're the same thing except the way you get the cell. The reason it's called a bone marrow transplant, before this drug Neupogen and before the apheresis machine, they had to drill into the bone marrow to suck out marrow and then get the stem cell out of that. Am I correct on that? And so it evolved into simply being called the stem cell transplant. Some hospitals still drill into the bone and suck out the marrow to get the stem cell. But they're ultimately the same thing.
Doesn't sound like much fun.
There wasn't a lot of fun through the whole process, Senator.
Yeah. I can remember reading your description of the pain that you suffered in that first effort to get some of your bone marrow. No anesthetic.
That was not good medicine.
Well, I hope that's not a widespread practice now.
I've learned that it's not.
Good.
Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education will now proceed. Today, our focus is on stem cells. Our hearing coincides with the announcement by the South Korean Nuclear Transplantation Consortium that they are starting an operation today on a World Stem Cell Foundation, which will be based in the Seoul National University in South Korea, with satellite offices in San Francisco and England. I applaud what they are doing, but I regret that the United States is falling farther behind in world leadership on scientific research generally, and specifically on stem cell research.